while the official proclaimed return to work rates from Beijing are talking about a 95, 99% return to work rate, when you move across the country, there is a high degree of variation in those numbers. Large corporations that I've spoken to are more like 70 or 75%, some lower than that, some higher than that. That's the first point. The second, of course, is that return to work is one thing, return to previous production levels is something else. And there are a whole bunch of areas of production, not least of which are in the services sector, where consumers have been reluctant to return to demand. And so overall supply coming out of the economy has been impacted. And I suppose the last point is this: China being first in and possibly first out, subject to second wave effects, we can come back to that if you like, is that because of the synchronous nature of this global recession, the bottom line is that external demand for Chinese goods is being hit big time. So the compounding effect of other countries and economies in the world suppressing their own imports from China for the simple reason that they themselves are experiencing demand-side crises as well, is also playing itself back into the Chinese economy.
Indeed, yeah. So short translation is basically don't count on exports to help China's recovery, which means they're going to have to do it themselves, DIY. Are they going to, do you think, are they going to be forced to return to their old playbook, which is throw hundreds of thousands of tons of cement into infrastructure and possibly bricks and mortar real estate as well?
Well, one of the fascinating analytical questions at present is what is happening in terms of China's stimulus policy response. So far, against what we've seen as OECD standards of response, the United States, Germany, the United Kingdom, Australia, elsewhere, where you see a fiscal stimulatory response in the order of magnitude of around about 10% of GDP. We're not seeing anything like that coming out of China so far. What the Chinese have done is some regulatory relaxation. We have taxation holidays or postponement of obligations. We also have direct payments to Chinese consumers in the form of coupons. But so far, if you aggregate that, this has not been huge. I think the Chinese right now are examining carefully their toolbox about what they do next, because frankly, until consumers begin behaving more normally in China, there's always going to be a constraint on their ability to economically return to where they were before.
Kevin, second round effects that could be felt in 2021, how would you characterise them? And do you think a spike in inflation because of food shortages, that could be an issue, and also a rise in unemployment and the social issues that could go with it?
I think the first thing to say about second round effect, and those of you in Singapore understand this full well, is the immediate second round effect of the virus, which is subject to what happens on the vaccine front, subject to what happens to other medical innovations, from testing to surveillance to the rest of the policy mix. All I know is that political authorities, whether it's in Beijing, Singapore, Seoul, Tokyo, and the rest of the world, are very, very careful right now about second wave effects once lockdowns are eased, even partially eased. But as for the economic second round effects to which you referred, yes, there are great concerns in China and in other parts of the world about long-term food security and the impact that'll have on food prices. Thirdly, the Chinese government knows full well that the historical formula that 6% growth is necessary to generate sufficient employment and sufficient improvement in national living standards to guarantee social and therefore political stability, that underlying equation hasn't changed. So therefore, going back to our earlier discussion of what happens with fiscal, monetary policy and financial stimulus, I think we need to assume that the Chinese will step in before too long to ensure that this does not devolve into a social, let alone political explosion.
Kevin, as a former Australian Prime Minister, as a former leader, when you consider the narrative that's going on in the United States right now, and that is reopening some parts of the economy and reopening some states, does that look dangerously premature from a public health point of view to do so?
Well, I'm a graduate in Chinese language and Chinese politics. I'm not an epidemiologist. But to be fair to the Americans and to be fair to any other national government at present, this is the truly wicked problem of contemporary public policy and public politics. On the one hand, the obvious public health imperative, which is that maximum flattening of the curve occurs as a consequence of maximization of social isolation, quarantine, lockdown, and the associated measures. And on the other side of the pendulum, you have the direct economic consequence of that, the data points on which we've just been discussing. So getting this calibration right in terms of a gradual return to work is frankly a highly complex piece of public policy and piece of public economic policy as well. I worry in the United States that there is such, given the political overhang of the US presidential elections in November, that President Trump has been chafing at the bit to get people back to work as early as possible. The worst thing that can happen in America is for that to happen prematurely and for there to be a genuine second wave effect in terms of the virus breaking out of the box again.